we never take it for granted when we hold an event that people are just going to show up. And we're always appreciative of the fact that you do. And if the audience is large or small, that doesn't disturb us, because I always believe in doing that. Small things are important. And thousands of small groups like this are sustaining the church in many positive ways these days. So the title of the talk is Always Be Prepared. Some of you might be wondering, well, what prepared for what? Had someone speak to me just a few moments ago and thought, well, this may be being prepared for death. We've got a famous book written by St. Alphonsus Liguori on preparation for death. I'm a fan of St. Alphonsus Liguori, but I've never read any of his works, even though I've got about 4 or 5 in my library, because I've been told it gives you scruples. So I have enough issues with scruples as it is. So always be prepared, as Arlette said, does come from Scripture, comes from the New Testament, and comes from 1 Peter 3:15. And hopefully I'll get the quote precisely correct off the top of my head. Always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that is in you, but always do it with gentleness and reverence. So there's 2 parts to that. Always be prepared to give a defense. Some translations are defense, and some translations are reasoned explanation for the hope that is in you. That's part 1. Part 2, always do it with gentleness and reverence. And I'm emphasizing the second half. You'll see in a little while later why I'm doing that. Who is St. Peter speaking to? He's speaking to Christians in general. Okay, because Christianity is beginning to get traction, beginning to get converts, beginning to get notice in the broader public realm, and people are going to ask a lot of questions. And so we need to be ready to answer those questions. It's a hard thing to be ready to answer questions, and we can't always be ready for every question. But really, this purpose of this talk is to keep in mind that apologetics is always an essential part of the life of the church. And we live in an age now, currently in the history of the church, where apologetics is really on the back foot, has really been relegated, is really suffering, and is not where it should be, except for a few minor exceptions here and there. I'm going to be talking about new apologetics and distinguish that from old apologetics. You've heard about new evangelization. Well, how is that different from evangelization? And how is new apologetics distinct from apologetics? People need to know the distinctions. Then I'm going to have a look at the Second Vatican Council, specifically what it said about apologetics. And you'll be surprised about what it does say. Positively surprised. Then I'm going to have a look at modern popes on apologetics, right up to until the present pope. Then I'm going to have a look, and then I'm going to go through a research project that I did some years back, and what it discovered, and what it produced, and what I'm hoping to see in Sydney, in New South Wales, and Australia in the future. If I was to ask you this question, name me all the apologists you know in Australia, people who are actively involved in apologetics. Some of you could actually do that. And that would be a terrible thing. Why do I say that? Because there's so few of us. You would know them because there's so few of us, really. Of course, there are people doing work here and there privately that we don't know about. And I'm sure they're doing apologetics in their own way, in their own circumstances, and it's not in the public realm. Right? These people aren't writing books or giving talks or, doing YouTube videos or, whatever. But they're doing it wherever they can privately, etc. But if you want to talk about public apologists, and that I know, people that have been continually engaged in this work, we know about Father Peter Joseph, for example, and his published works. David Obeid, who used to be with us here at Lumen Verum before he moved into the country, was active, and I'm sure he's still active in some way. There's also Michael Obeid, not related to David, but he's keen on apologetics. There's the work of Perusia Media, of course, which is phenomenal work in this country. We've got a lot to be thankful for that work. And there might be others that I should know, but they've slipped my mind. There's not many of us. And the sad thing, they seem to be heavily ethnically based, Lebanese based for the most part, which, probably you can see, well, there's some connection between Lebanese and apologetics because Lebanese like to argue, perhaps. Maybe that's an argument there. But for the apologists I know to be predominantly Middle Eastern background, again, is not a good thing. So we need to, and one reason why Lumen Verum started 27 odd years ago was to get other people interested in teaching and defending the Catholic faith. And that we don't have to be formal theologians to do that. But we need to be able to do it somehow, in some way, in our circumstances. I'll move now on to new apologetics. My argument is that new apologetics actually is not new. It's the original apologetics. It's what new apologetics is what St. Peter stated in 1 Peter 3:15. If I may repeat it, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that is in you. Do it with gentleness and reverence. New apologetics just reminds us of the second half of that quote, to do it with gentleness and reverence. And I know that from personal experience. Now, when I came into apologetics myself, it's because I was tampering, or dabbling is the right word, with Protestantism as a teenager and in my early 20s. If I give you a bit of my background, I didn't have Catholic education. I never went to a Catholic infant school or primary school or secondary school or university. All my education in those areas were in the public realm. Greenacre Infants, Greenacre Primary, Punchbowl Boys, Sydney University Law School, etc., etc. So, I was educated in a mixed environment where there were a lot of people of, Islamic background, Greek Orthodox background, Protestant background, nominal Catholic background, atheist background, Marxist background, whatever. And it was in 1979, in May 79, when a friend of mine named Stephen said, "Oh, Robert, there's this visiting American preacher coming to Australia to talk about Jesus. Would you like to come and hear him?" They were his precise words. I can't remember the day, but it would have been around my birthday, around May 21, etc. Because I went to hear this famous American preacher on May 30th of 1979 at Randwick Racecourse. I just turned 15, and I went with Stephen, and I went with Joseph, and I went with Andrew. There's four of us together. We went to Arthur Street here in Punchbowl. We got on the Punchbowl Baptist minibus and we drove to Randwick Racecourse. There was about 20,000 people there that night. It was raining. Billy Graham was all fired up and he did the usual altar call, and dozens, maybe a few hundred people went down, stood on the field in grass that was ankle deep with a bit of rain coming down. I was one of those few hundred. And I made that commitment to accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Saviour, etc., etc. But I knew one thing. I knew I was a Catholic, at least nominally. And I knew I couldn't, nor did I want to, suddenly become a Baptist or anything else. I wanted to stay Catholic, but I didn't have the answers to all my issues. But I hung around with my friend Stephen. Joseph and Andrew had experiences which were flash in the pans. My experience stepped me up, and it was a very important step in my life. If I didn't have that step, I don't think I'd be where I am today. I didn't become a perfect Christian, and I certainly wasn't a perfect Catholic, and I had multiple more steps to climb with respect to that. But what I experienced that time has remained with me, and thanks be to God, was built upon. But I hung around environments with Interschool Christian Fellowship for the next 2 years at school, and then the Evangelical Union at Sydney Law School for the next, in total, 6 years, to have enough engagement with Baptists and Sydney Anglicans, and I should mention, of course, 6 years in the Punchbowl Baptist cricket team as well, before there was any Catholic teams. You know, the Papal Bulls are now famous, but there were no Papal Bulls of any kind back in the early to mid-80s. And being in those environments regularly, there was a regular anti-Catholicism. Most of it was mild, but it was consistent, it was persistent, it was regular. My friend Stephen probably never gave up trying to convert me to the Baptist faith. But there was a significant amount of anti-Catholicism, and some were really nasty anti-Catholics. So for me, the religious debate, Catholicism versus Protestantism of whatever form, naturally involved argument and name-calling and heated argument. And, you're right, I'm right, you're wrong. We're the true Christians, you're false, we're going to heaven for sure, you're going to hell. Catholics, this is what I heard. Catholics worship the Pope, Catholics worship Mary, Catholics worship statues, Catholics worship bread, Catholics worship anything and anyone except God the Father. And there's this gigantic computer in Belgium named the Beast. And it's of course, it's in a Catholic country, so that says something sinister. And you can't call Belgium a Catholic country anymore, I assure you, sadly. But, because it's in a Catholic country, it must be the Pope's mechanism to control the world one day. I heard all this. So for me, apologetics involved argument, and sometimes heated argument, and that was natural. So later on, when I had trauma at law school, I had a major depression in my final year with 6 weeks to go before finishing my exams. It was so traumatic. I was first in third year and last in final year, and I couldn't finish final year for another 3.5 years. It was in that time that I discovered Catholicism as it should be. I was at a friend's house, a guy named Fabian. Fabian, I still have I've reconnected with Fabian in recent years. He's a very wealthy businessman, Chinese, Papua New Guinea based Chinese businessman now, up there in the north, and he's doing very well, etc. And when we were at law school together, I thought he was a bit weird. I didn't like his Marian devotion. He was too Marian for me. As a nominal Catholic, so, engrossed in Protestant thinking, Marian devotion was just too dangerous for me. Back in 1980, when I was in year 11 and I was at an Interschool Christian Fellowship Bible study, and I was just a little bit distracted, I was just flicking through the Bible that I had in front of me on the table, and I just happened to open up to that section in the Gospel of Matthew that mentions specifically the names of Jesus' brothers, James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon. And when I looked at that, I was just so struck. I felt like I was punched in the gut. Jesus had brothers. They're named. How could Mary be a perpetual virgin then? The Catholic Church says she was and remains so. The Catholic Church is so obviously wrong, contradicting the Bible. What's the answer? I just want an answer. Where is that answer? And I made a commitment from that moment onward never to pray the Hail Mary again. And that would last 6 years. The breakthrough, if you call it that, came for me when I was traumatized by my depression at law school, and one day I decided to visit Fabian at his residence in Cleveland Street near Sydney University, number 63 Cleveland Street. And every time I drive past that house, I say a prayer, because everything that happened to me in that house was good for my faith and my Catholicism. I went upstairs into Fabian's office, and he had an old book called The Question Box. It was just sitting on a little table. And it was so old, it was literally falling apart. This was an original copy from the 1890s. And the cover was ripped off, the pages were turning brown. I picked it up. I said, this looks interesting. And I could see it was literally question and answers. And some of these questions I'm very familiar with. These are the questions my Protestant friends were asking me for years. And they were very extensive answers. And I said, I'm going to take this home. I don't even think I asked Fabian permission. I just took it. And I read this 447-page book in 2 days. I've never read any book as fast as that in my life. And it just was like a lightning flash. You know, like St. Paul was knocked off his horse by lightning in the voice of our Lord who appeared to him on the road to Damascus. This wasn't anything of that nature, but for me privately, it was my moment where, in a sense, I got onto my horse. I got onto my Catholic horse. This Father Conway, who authored this book, who responded to these questions and collected all the answers and put them into this book and had it published. And you can still get it on Amazon, by the way, but don't get any version after 1962. Get the pre-1962, the original version. You can get it cheap, $3.50 or something. It answered every objection and fear I ever had. Absolutely. Every question my friend Stephen asked, or Andrew at law school, or anyone else, was asked in that book and answered with solid scripture, and these people called church fathers. Stephen was emphatic that the early Christianity, pre-Constantine, was evangelical, and that the Baptist Church was a restoration of evangelical Christianity, primitive Christianity, and that Catholicism was a Constantinian foundation and a corruption, some type of hybrid blend between paganism and Catholicism. Well, my friend never mentioned ever people like St. Ignatius of Antioch or St. Polycarp of Smyrna or St. Justin Martyr or St. Irenaeus of Lyon or Oregon or anyone else, Tertullian or anyone else. They are strictly sola scriptura, so why quote them? But you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't claim to be the restoration of the early church and reject all the authors, all the saints, all the martyrs, all the great heroes of that era and all their writings and still claim to be of the early church or, restoration of the early church. But for me, why I'm relating this story is that I became now a Catholic apologist with great enthusiasm, but very aggressive. What all I caught from Protestants for years, I was ready to give back. And I read Question Box and I read Faith of Our Fathers, and I voraciously want to buy and read every Catholic apologetics book I can get my hands on so that I'll always be prepared. Okay? And I had a lot of humdinger arguments. And I'd have, meetings and gatherings with people in homes or in McDonald's or halls or behind the monastery at St. Charbel or whatever, where it would be a 3-hour event. And you don't have to pay for view for this event, and I don't think I ever lost an argument. I'm pretty sure I never lost an argument, but I never won anybody. Some of those nights I remember driving home thinking, he didn't lay a glove on me. I smashed him. Wow, that was fantastic. Every point they raised, I knocked it off. I gave a response and I left them speechless. Well, I had a blind spot. And you know what was missing in what I was doing? I wasn't following 1 Peter 3:15. I just had a blind spot about it. I wasn't consciously rejecting 1 Peter 3:15. I just never thought about the other half of the coin. Do it with gentleness and reverence. It was, for me, apologetics was a contest to win battles and not to win souls, which is why I never won souls. We don't do it anyway. It's the Holy Spirit who does it. We're just instruments. But I wasn't realizing that I was an instrument that was blocking the Holy Spirit's work on those individuals. And, I remember, Jehovah's Witnesses are pacifists. But in one encounter I had with a Jehovah's Witness in my house, in the front of my house, he wanted to punch me. He said, I just want to punch you. And that's how aggressive I was to him. And this was a pacifist, not wanting to convert to Catholicism, but to breach one of the fundamental tenets of Jehovah's Witness faith, pacifism. All right. But see, I saw this aggression also in some great Catholic apologists. I've still got books on my shelf with the tone and the language. It's very caustic, very combative, because they were written in a certain age. All right. Tertullian was known for this, and Tertullian, his other problem was pride, and that led him to become a schismatic in the end, an extremist, and then form his own sect. St. Jerome had elements of this. Okay? The great St. Jerome, father of the church, doctor of the church. I don't want to be too critical, but he had that side to his personality. And of course, in the polemic between Christianity and Islam, you see that. And in the polemic between Christianity and Judaism, you see that. And early Jewish works against Christianity were very hostile and very aggressive against the persons of Jesus and Mary in particular. And we see it in various strands of Protestantism, without a doubt. I mean, I think the way I was in my early years as a Catholic semi-part-time apologist was influenced by the aggression I was encountered within Protestantism. And I still see that today. The vast majority of posts that are put on my YouTube channel, having a go at some of my videos, the vast majority are very aggressive and very rude and very insulting. And these are Protestant people defending whatever particular view they have. And of course, this continues with the new atheism. And the style of the new atheism in their apologetic for their cause is to deliberately go out of their way to insult, to ridicule, to belittle. That is their methodology. It's not a defect or a lack. It is their modus operandi, how they want to operate. All right. What changed for me, and when did it change? I was relating this story earlier today to someone else for a different reason. It's somewhere in August 2001. And I'm doing playground duty at St. Charles College. Just totally oblivious to everything else. I've been there for nearly 12 years and doing what I was normally doing, bullying students. Getting students to pick up papers, tuck their shirts in, stop swearing, blah, blah, all that. And then suddenly, this woman who was working in the office named Mary Arras, she's passed away, God rest her soul, she calls out. St. Charles had a very professional way of doing things. He just shouts out of the window, Robert, there's a phone call for you. Or there was a phone call for you. We were looking for you, but we couldn't find you. And I shouted back, but I've been doing playground duty. And then I said, well, who called? And she said, Archbishop Pell. And I said, Archbishop Pell? What's he calling for? And Mary said, look, don't worry. He left his number and he asked if you could call him at 5 o'clock. So this is about maybe 1:15 or something. So I had 4 hours to get really worried about what this is all about. Because what I didn't want to do was leave St. Charles College. So I'm thinking straight away, I hardly know the man. We met once or twice incidentally, I think 1993, we went down there. I was part of the choir at Lewisham. We went down there for High Mass, Missa Solemnis in St. Patrick's Cathedral. So I remember being in the, in the room with him when he was robing for the Mass, etc. And then when I was with the Knights of the Southern Cross, I met him incidentally when he came to one of our meetings. But I didn't know him. He didn't know me. So this was really strange and rather worrying. And when I rang, I was very nervous. And in the course of the conversation, he said, look, Robert, I want to meet you. When can I meet you? And I said, do you mind if I ask what this is about? And he said, yes, I want to offer you a job. And that was my worst fear, because I didn't want to leave St. Charles College. Anyway, I met with him in Cathedral House. And after he complained about the fact that it took $40 million to build that house, we got onto the conversation and he said, look, I want to offer you a job and this is the job. And he explained the job. And it was about him revolutionising university chaplaincy there at Sydney University and starting something new. And you all know Anthony McCarthy. He'd been working on the Archbishop behind the scenes to get this happening. But the Archbishop thought Anthony McCarthy was too young to lead the project. And somehow my name was put forward, probably by Anthony. And the Archbishop asked me if I would give 2 years to do that work. And I wasn't prepared to do 2 years, but I was prepared to give him 1. So we agreed on 1. So I'll work to establish the new chaplaincy with Anthony McCarthy in 2002 at USyd. And when he was explaining the job, what it was about, I was actually thinking in my mind, look, this is really airy-fairy. This is not a real job. I don't know whether I'm excited about it. But then he said this spontaneously. He said, and I want apologetics to be part of it. Then now it's sounding like a real job. That's what I thought. Then he said this immediately afterwards, but I want you to get on with the Anglicans. And I was thinking in my own mind, oh, okay, all right, because I wasn't that type. Me, I'm going to be at Sydney University and he wants apologetics, oh, we'll give him apologetics, okay? We'll take them all on, all right, whoever they are, don't worry about it. It was that year in 2002, which was the real revelation for me about the gentleness and reverence. Because university chaplaincy work was very hard then and it's harder now. I ended up spending 6 years on campus full-time and part-time, and by the end of it, I was exhausted. Anyway, we chip away and we were doing good work, but it was mainly with our own people, Catholics. And there was great fruits showing. Thanks be to God. And the Anglicans, who are the Sydney Anglicans, very evangelical, and the Jensens had just taken over the Archdiocese of Sydney, and they're very anti-Catholic. They were taking notice. So some of them were coming to our events. And some of our Catholic students were inviting some of them to come to our events. And they'll tip us off beforehand that this person's coming, this person's coming, this person's coming. All right. But nothing was really showing with respect to non-Catholic conversions or anything at all. Though there were good numbers of Catholics getting involved, getting ignited in their faith, and a number of them are now Catholic priests, which is a wonderful thing to say. Anyway, we're coming to the close of the year. It was October and we decided we'll do a mission week. Now, I wouldn't do a mission week now in October because it's basically coming up to exam time. But we did it, and it was a turning point for me and apologetics in my life. 2 things happened in that week. One, when I was sitting at this table in Eastern Avenue, and you get about 4,000 or 5,000 students an hour, like rivers in 2 directions flowing past you, and you're just standing there, sitting there, handing out pamphlets, hoping someone comes up to have a conversation with you, and it happens regularly. There's this Indian fellow who comes up, and he introduced himself to me. And this guy was very bright, very sharp, and he explained to me his life story. He was born and raised a Hindu, then he became a communist and an atheist, then he converted to High Anglicanism. And he was coming to my table one day after another, and he'll ask me all these questions. These were the 2 specific questions I remember. Robert, how can the Catholic Church justify canonising a man as evil as St. Pius V? Oh, his exact words. So I'm struggling to answer that one, I assure you. The next question was, what do you think of Lord Acton's position concerning the definition of papal infallibility? Now, I knew something about that. I knew something about both of those issues, but I couldn't nail answers for him. In fact, he was the only person who ever asked questions I could never answer. Well, near the end of that mission week, on the Thursday, he came to my table again. And when he arrived, I was thinking in my mind, uh-oh. There's going to come more questions I can't answer. Anyway, he came in, he stood in front of me, and he was bouncing a little bit like this. He said, Robert, I've got something to tell you. I said, yeah? What is it? I've decided to become Catholic. And I was, what? How? I never said anything. I never answered any of your questions. How do you want to suddenly become Catholic? And I began to get suspicious. Maybe he knows one of the girls in the chaplaincy he was attracted to or something. I don't know. I don't know what it was. But that's what he said. And the most important thing is that he only could come, one reason why he could come to that conclusion, because in all our conversations, we formed a bond. We formed a friendship. We were talking to each other with respect. There was no anger. There was no hostility. There was no accusations. There was no name calling. There was no one speaking over each other. There was trust built between us in the context of friendship. Now that man is a Dominican priest working in Melbourne, and his name is originally was Kieran Krishna, and he took the name Kieran Newman, and I think his name is now Father Kieran Krishna. I can't remember exactly. The irony of all this is that he's a Dominican priest, Robert Krishna. When his first question to me was to denounce a Dominican Pope as evil, now he's a member of that same order. So God does have a sense of humour. And he's a genius, he's a brilliant man. He did his doctorate on St. Augustine's contribution to the Industrial Revolution. I don't know if that's exactly, or the Scientific Revolution. And he did that in good time at Sydney University before he went off to study with the Dominicans. The second case was a Baptist in the same week, same mission week, who was brought to one of our masses on the feast day of St. Ignatius of Antioch, October 17 that year. So, because that's one of our Catholic students tipped us off that this student was coming. This student was the son of a Baptist minister, and he was on the executive for Evangelical Union, one of the top 3 student evangelicals. And he sat at the back with 2 other evangelical friends, and he listened to the Mass and he listened to the homily. And we tipped off Father that these evangelicals were in the back row, if he could give his homily on St. Ignatius of Antioch and what he said about the Eucharist. And he did that. And out of those 3, that one gentleman, the son of the minister, was so struck by the quotes. He said to me later, I never realised that belief in the real presence was expressed so early on in the history of the church. The other 2 evangelicals, it just went over their heads as if nothing was said. That's what this fellow told me. Anyway, I would then, after, somehow I'm not exactly sure, but afterwards I would meet with him for about maybe 4 sessions totaling 12 hours, sitting with him in the chaplaincy in conversation. And him asking all these questions, making all these statements and comments, me trying my best to answer his questions. And it was done in the context of gentleness and reverence. There was no argument. There was no conflict. Again, there was no heated debate, raised voices, name calling, people talking over each other, accusations, finger pointing. There was none of that. There was friendship and trust. And at the end of the 12 hours, and this fellow was also talking to other people as well in the same period. And at the end of those 12 hours, he put his book down on the lounge next to him and he said, Robert, I've decided to become a Catholic. And those 2 events changed me forever when it came to apologetics. It made me see what I was doing wrong. And it made me realise, hey, there's nothing wrong with being friends with these people. Because it's only in that context of friendship and trust and mutual respect that really the Holy Spirit can operate without human obstruction. If anyone comes to you and is in your face and is raising his voice and calling you names and accusing you of things, what are the chances that you're going to be converted by him? 0. You win the argument, but you don't win the soul. At the moment, I'm doing physiotherapy on my lower back. I got another session tomorrow. I get 5 free sessions a year on Bupa, so I take advantage of it. And on the first session, this young Italian fellow, we get talking and different things, and he says, well, you know, I do also work for the Sydney Wanderers soccer team, but I decided to quit because it involved me working on Sundays, and I'd rather go to church than miss out on church on Sundays. And then eventually I said, oh yeah, what church do you go to? And he said, oh, I belong to the Faith Baptist community. And I said, oh, you're one of them. And he said, oh, what do you mean by that? And then I had to remind myself, calm down. I've had encounters with quite a few Faith Baptists over the years. I've actually got an ex-student of mine who became a Faith Baptist minister. And then we got talking, and we keep talking, and he's got a very heavy hand and elbow when he's doing the pressing on my muscles. But throughout all this, we are talking. We've had 3 sessions in a row. We've got the 4th one tomorrow and a 5th one 2 weeks from there. And I've given him a copy of Defend the Faith. And again, practice new apologetics, which is really original apologetics. Let's have conversation. Fire away. I'll start tomorrow. Have you read any section of the book I gave you? And he'll say something and we'll go from there. And we'll keep it friendly and we'll keep conversation happening. I'll give him answers. Yeah, he's stubborn. He's really stubborn. That's how hardline the Faith Baptists are. They're so hardline, they reject all the other Baptists. Right? And I'm saying, you're a Bible believer, right? Well, okay, who's the rock? In 36 times in the Old Testament refers to God as the rock. God is the rock, not Peter. But hold on, and then I keep going. And then I'm giving all the quotes in the New Testament where it shows Peter is called rock. And what does Cephas mean? St. Paul calls him Cephas 6 times. Okay? He's not moving. I'll do my best, humanly speaking, staying friendly, staying calm, staying respectful. I'll give him the quotes. Keep reading, keep talking. The topics will vary in the 45 minutes. And, you know, and I think I know when I'm scoring points when he presses my muscles harder and harder. You know, but in the end, we do this and we have to do it and we will do it and we leave the rest to God. We don't convert anybody. God does the conversion. We're just instruments. I want to leave helping this young fellow realise, hey, the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church does have answers. That's what I wanted to know when I was 16 to 21 years of age. How can this organisation have these beliefs? They must have the answers. I want this fellow, who's an ex-Catholic, to realise that he was robbed of his faith and that the Catholic Church does have the answers. I can't give him all the answers for everything that he needs to know. We don't have the time, but I've given him a book that will help him. Hopefully he'll go back to that book again and again. And I've given him my phone number, I've given him my email. You know, that's the challenge. Have a look, have a read, ask me any questions you want. I'll continue that tomorrow. Where do we get the term new apologetics from? John Paul II, 1999, the bishops of Western Canada visited Rome for an ad limina visit. And John Paul II said the following to them: we need a new apologetic geared to the needs of today, which keeps in mind that our task is not just to win arguments, but to win souls, to engage not in ideological bickering, but to vindicate and promote the gospel. Such an apologetic will need to find a common grammar with those who see things differently and do not share our assumptions, lest we end up speaking different languages even though we may be using the same tongue. This new apologetic will also need to breathe a spirit of humanity, that compassionate humility which understands people's anxieties and questions and which is not quick to presume in them ill will or bad faith. At the same time, it will not yield to a sentimental sense of the love and compassion of Christ sundered from the truth, but will insist instead that true love and compassion can make radical demands precisely because they are inseparable from the truth which alone sets us free. I might have not agreed with this 25 years ago, but I agree with it now because of experience. You can't presume that the other is bad. Sure, let's use old-fashioned language here. They might be a heretic, they might be schismatic, they might be whatever, but that doesn't mean they're bad-willed. They are just victims for the most part in their own upbringing. The prejudice that have been imbibed into them from their very earliest years. The fact that their Catholic upbringing was anything but Catholic, yet they equate being Catholic as what they were and experienced. All the Catholics around me, they don't know the Bible, they don't pray, they just swear, they get drunk, they womanize, they do, I don't see any holiness there. That's the experience of so many former Catholics, right? And in the end, it's only God who judges the interior forum and the hearts and minds of individuals to discover whether they're in good faith or not. My presumption is that they are. I have met some people where I question, I think, gosh, they're just so stubborn. Here's the truth so clearly given to them and they still don't accept. But in the end, only God can make the final judgment. Why did John Paul II give us this statement? He was probably aware of the radical decline of apologetics in general in the life of the church. Why did this happen? You know, there was a golden age of apologetics in the 19th and first half of the 20th century. There were a lot of converts to Catholicism, and the central place where this was happening was in England, Great Britain. So many famous converts. I'll name you some, you probably remember the others. You know, there was Monsignor Ronald Knox, there was Frederick Faber, there was, Cardinal Newman, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, his son, what was his name again? Call it out. There were so many converts, and you had Chesterton, and you had Belloc, etc. And in Australia you had Frank Sheed, and there was a boom period. Then the council came and everything just seemed to die. We had a new spirit, Irenicism. The council documents are not combative documents. They're pastoral documents. So there was a different spirit there, and it was one to promote good relations between people of goodwill. It was also a call to ecumenism, interfaith dialogue, and this predominated. But did this necessarily mean that we were to throw out apologetics? Does this mean if we would go down the ecumenical road, interfaith dialogue road, that we are to necessarily throw away apologetics? My argument is not, and I'll prove my argument soon enough. What we had arising was religious indifferentism. One religion is as good as another. All religions are the same. There are many ways to heaven. All these slogans we hear that are now just commonplace. None of that was in the council either. And then with the rise and predominance of modernism, which had been threatening for over a century and now is in the ascendancy, the last thing they want is apologetics. In fact, the only apologetics they engage in is an apologetic against apologetics. The only arguments they virulently fight about, is that why we must not have apologetics. Now, I'm going to read you extracts from the Second Vatican Council, and you tell me which one of these quotes throws out apologetics. Lumen Gentium, number 10. Everywhere on earth they must bear witness to Christ and give an answer to those who seek an account of that hope of eternal life which is in them. So that's Lumen Gentium, paraphrasing 1 Peter 3:15. All Christians are to give an answer to those who seek an account. That's the core of apologetics. Then we have, again, Lumen Gentium, number 11. Catholics are more perfectly bound to the Church by the sacrament of confirmation, and the Holy Spirit endows them with special strength so that they are more strictly obliged to spread and defend the faith, both by word and by deed as true witnesses of Christ. Then we have the famous Dignitatis Humanae, which is became a very controversial document in the post-conciliar era. Number 14, the disciple has a grave obligation to Christ, his master, to grow daily in his knowledge of the truth he has received from him, to be faithful in announcing it, and vigorous in defending it without recourse to methods contrary to the spirit of the gospel. Obligation, I'll repeat these words, grave obligation, inflection, right? Rigorous in defending it, the Catholic faith. Then we have the document Apostolicum, Actuositatem. Excuse me my pronunciation. Number 6. This is the decree relating to the laity. Since in our own times new problems are arising and very serious errors are circulating, which tend to undermine the foundations of religion. This is 1965, by the way. What I just read is more applicable to the now than ever. New problems arise in serious errors are circulating, far worse now than they were in 1965. The moral order and human society itself, these have been undermined. Foundations of religion, the moral order and human society itself. This sacred synod earnestly exhorts laymen, and this is the language of 1965, that is all baptized Catholics, each according to their own gifts of intelligence and learning, to be more diligent in doing what they can to explain, defend, and properly apply Christian principles to the problems of our era in accordance with the mind of the Church. That's paragraph 6. To explain, to defend. That's apologetics. That's a call to the laity, not just to the theologians, the philosophers, the biblical scholars, those with licenses and doctorates in sacred theology, right? All the baptized. Why are these council texts ignored? Why did they become ignored? Well, I've got my views. People had their own agenda with respect to the council, during the council, and in the drafting of conciliar documents to ensure that there was enough vagaries so that all agendas could, pin their hope on something in the texts. But then post-conciliar, there were even more virulent agendas pushed forward, which really claimed to be in the name of the spirit of the council, but were really subverting the council. And yes, okay, there's clear calls to ecumenism and clear calls to interfaith dialogue, and they get all the spotlight, all the attention, all the activity, but the clear calls to apologetics, someone turned off the lights. Well, not enough people were turning on the lights, and they just became ignored. So there was a dramatic collapse in interest in apologetical activity, a dramatic collapse right across the board. So you wouldn't find apologetics on the agenda anymore in high school curriculum, in seminaries, in universities. The most you'll get somewhere here or there would be courses in fundamental theology, which have value, but they wouldn't call it apologetics. Apologetics now became, in a sense, a dirty old-fashioned word. Lock it up in the cupboard and only refer to it for historical reasons. It's no longer applicable in the modern age. And that's still a very strong, very virulent strain of thinking in Catholic academia today. I haven't got it here, but when I did my research thesis, one of my principal books was written by a fellow in America who works at Notre Dame University in Indiana, Glenn Siniscalchi, and he published a book in recent times called Retrieving Apologetics. And it's a very, very good book. And he did a survey of all Catholic institutions in the United States, putting questions to them about apologetics and would you have a course in apologetics and we want to see it revived in any way. The vast majority of people didn't answer, and the vast majority of those who did were hostile to the idea of an apologetics course in Catholic universities. What have modern popes said about apologetics? Okay, I've already given John Paul II, but I'm just going to give you two quotes, one from Benedict XVI and one from Pope Francis. So, Benedict XVI said the following in Caritas in Veritate, number 1. It's a long quote, so bear with me. Quote, "To defend the truth, to articulate it with humility and conviction, and to bear witness to it in life are therefore exacting and indispensable forms of charity." So this is his unique contribution, Pope Benedict, to equate apologetics with charity. It's a service in love and truth for the sake of the other. Okay, back onto the quote. "Charity, in fact, rejoices in the truth. Truth needs to be sought, found and expressed within the economy of charity. But charity in its turn needs to be understood, confirmed and practiced in the light of truth. In this way, not only do we do a service to charity enlightened by truth, but we also help give credibility to truth, demonstrating its persuasive and authenticating power in the practical setting of social living." All right. Then we have Pope Francis in his Joy of the Gospel, paragraph 132. "Proclaiming the gospel message to different cultures also involves proclaiming it to professional, scientific and academic circles. This means an encounter between faith, reason and the sciences with a view to developing new approaches and arguments on the issue of credibility. A creative apologetics which would encourage greater openness to the gospel on the part of all." Again, that's paragraph 132. All right, well, that's, I think, enough overview of the modern magisterial pronouncements on apologetics, and from my point of view, my perspective, it's absolutely conclusive that the Church formally still asks for apologetics. And how many are doing it? All right, in Australia, how many Catholics do we have? 5 million? It's in decline, by the way. The last two censuses conducted in 2016 and 2021 have shown that a relentless decline has begun. You can call me pessimistic, but we're now down. In 2011, we were 26-something% of the Australian population. We're now down to 22%. In 2011, we were about 5.3 million Catholics, raw number. We're now just over 5 million. Is this going to reverse? I hope so. Would I bet my house on a reversal? No, I wouldn't. I remember in 1986, I remember these stats quite well because I used to teach studies of religion, and I have numbers going back to 1991 in my head still. In 1991, 74.1% of the Australian population claimed to be Christian of one denomination or another. That's now down below 50%. It's not just Catholicism in decline. It's Christianity, whatever you want to call it, that general generic term, right across the board in decline, in the Anglosphere, in the United States, in Great Britain, in Canada, in Australia. It's not just Australia. The Anglicans now are 9.8% of the Australian population. That's going to go down to 1 or 2% eventually. I remember when for so long in Australian history, they were not only the established church, but the largest denomination. And only in 1986 did Catholics surpass them numerically. And now look where they are. And why do I say 9.8% is going to become 1 to 2%? Because that's the practicing rate in Great Britain today. And by the way, for Catholics, it's not much better when you look at Western Europe and some of those countries. So whereas in Australia now, we're about 9 to 10% regular Mass attendance. In the United States, it's still around 24% for Catholics. But regular Mass attendance in Australia is defined as once a month. That's a fact, once a month. So where are we going to be? I know if you permit me to turn around, it's not good for the camera, I know, but the graphs are like this. This bulge that I'm drawing, that's the number of Catholics 55 years plus in age. Imagine this as a dam. The amount of water pouring out is much more than the amount of water pouring in. These age groups, these are people, 15 to 19, 19 to 25, 25 to 30. They're down at 3 to 5%. This bulge is passing out. These are the baby boomers and older crowd. I'm in that zone. I'm over 55. I'm in that zone. We're passing out. When they all die off, this graph will no longer look like this. It'll flatline like this at 3 to 4%. So as bad as we are now, it's going to get a lot worse. If the current trends continue, and as I said, I wouldn't bet my house that they're going to improve. How many apologists we need in this country? How many did I name at the beginning of this presentation? A handful? I believe we should have an apologist, one for every parish. How many parishes do we have in this country? How many thousands do we have? And we don't have them. And that is a calamity for the life of the church. For every Catholic, for every person who converts to the Catholic faith, 6 leave it. My oldest son told me just earlier this week in the United States, it's now worse. For every convert to Catholicism in the United States, 10 leave it. The category of ex-Catholics in the United States is the biggest category, so-called religious category, after Catholicism in the United States. Over 30 million ex-Catholics in the United States. Half of them have gone to various Protestant denominations. The other half have gone to New Age, atheism, or whatever. 30 years ago, I was in Brazil, and I saw the proliferation of evangelical and Pentecostal churches everywhere. And Pentecostal preachers in the street, and Mormon preachers in the street, and Jehovah's Witnesses preachers in the street. And for the Catholic Church, I saw old, cracked, empty, dirty churches. And it's worse now than it was 30 years ago. I'm not saying apologetics is the answer, but it's part of the answer. Because we're being eaten alive in so many parts of the world by people who are either some form of Protestantism or some form of New Age or some form of atheism or New Atheism, who are engaged in their own apologetics causes, eating away at us. And our people are defenseless. They don't have the answers, and they don't even know there are answers. And they don't believe there are answers. And that's why so many of them leave. How many of them are prepared? We're called to be always prepared. I'm now going to turn to the last section and about what is the proximate cause of this presentation tonight, or reason for this presentation tonight. I've done a lot of formal study in my time and probably embarrassed by the amount of it. When I was at university chaplaincy, I felt the need that I should get a master's degree because I was surrounded by a lot of really bright students. I had a law degree, I had a grad cert in RE, I had a graduate diploma of education, but that was it. When you're with students who are doing masters and doctorates, you tend to think, well, I should get up to speed. So I decided to do a master's degree, but I was very wary of what was out there by way of academic institutions. So I said, the safe road is to design my own question. So I'll do a master's thesis by research, and I'll go to ACU and I'll approach the School of Early Christian Studies, and so I did my thesis on St Justin Martyr, which is apologetics in the ancient church. It was a very hard project, probably too hard, and my examiners, my supervisors, were very rigorous, and I doubted for years whether I'd ever succeed with that, but thanks be to God I did. And I banked that, I kept that, and that was very good that I did that. It was good from the historical, philosophical, as well as apologetical perspectives. I did other studies relating to my work. It was necessary, being involved in Catholic education and religious education, etc. So I did all those studies as well. And in my early 50s, I'd given up on the idea of doing any form of doctorate or whatever, because I'm still traumatised by my experience at law school and my master's thesis. And I'm in my 50s and I think I don't really need to go through this anymore, and I'll live with what I've got. But in 2017, I was at a conference in North Sydney, Mary MacKillop House. It was March the 20th, and they were launching the new New South Wales, Catholic Schools New South Wales policy on evangelisation. And I went there because I had to go there, because that's what I do in schools. And I was approached by a professor from Notre Dame, Gerard O'Shea, who I knew of but didn't know well. But I knew he was a great man and one of the great heroes of Catholic education in Australia. And he said to me, "Robert, I've got 12 doctoral students at the moment. Would you want to be another one?" And I said, oh, Gerard, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go through all that again. I went through that, for years studying, and, I'm in my 50s now. My kids are still young. I need to do my job. I need to be with my kids. This is going to kill me. He said, "I'll look after you." And I trusted him. So I went with him, even though I was very nervous and scared at first. But to cut a long story short, I pulled it off with his help. And he was very helpful to make sure we had the right examiners and all that. And so instead of spending 8 years doing it, I spent less than 2.5 years doing it. And it's distinct from St Justin Martyr, which is old apologetics, ancient apologetics in the Roman Empire. The topic was new apologetics, but to have a practical side to it, because it wasn't a theology study, it was a religious education study. So I had to make it relevant to my work. So I have this desire in my heart to see apologetics come back in Catholic education. But the way we develop curriculum and the way we develop textbooks, it's not that easy to just say, hey, let's bring it in. Though it should be that easy, it just happens not to be that easy. By the way, we have introduced apologetics into the New Studies in Catholic Thought program for Year 11 and 12. It's there to some degree. And if you read Cath News today, there was an article there by Dr Paul Morrissey, the president of Campion College, saying any students who do that course will get special privileges in their enrolment at Campion College, which is very positive support for that course. In the rewrites of the No Worship and Love textbooks that Cardinal Pell brought into Melbourne in the mid to late 90s, K to 6, 7 to 12, in the rewrites of those, there is a whole chapter on apologetics been written for Year 10 and some elements of apologetics in Year 7. Good news stories. Those projects are still ongoing and hopefully will be completed by the end of next year. But what my thesis project was to study new apologetics, understand its core principles, and in doing that, I had to look at a lot of Catholic and even more Protestant scholars, Protestant apologetics. Sadly, there seems to be a lot more Protestant apologists than there are Catholic ones. Very sad. Not all the Protestant apologists are raving, foaming Calvinists or whatever. They're scholarly people as well, and gentlemen and gentlewomen and polite and respectful, etc., etc. Though you don't agree with their arguments, of course, in the areas where we contest issues. So it was to determine what is the new apologetics and extract the core principles. Then to create what was called an intervention program, which is a fancy term for a course. in new apologetics for secondary students. And my topic narrowed it down to Sydney Catholic schools, secondary schools in the Archdiocese of Sydney. And then the parameters were rather strict, only 36 lessons in the intervention program. And which lessons and which topics. And in this type of study, you don't just randomly pick any topic you like. You have to justify why you're choosing those particular topics. Which 36 topics and why. So we have to have data. And we're going to prepare a course for students. We have to know what are the student needs. Where are their gaps in their knowledge and practice? And sadly, they are legion. Terribly. It's a sad thing to say, but we have to say the truth here. How do I know what those gaps are in knowledge and practice? Well, fortunately, my boss at work, who's the Director of Mission and Identity, he's been engaged in what's called a meta-survey since 2014. And it's done every 2 years. 14, 16, 18, 20. So I had data from 18 and 20 in particular. And it's being undertaken right now. I just showed this morning, it's been done electronically. We've got 11,000 students already who've given feedback for 2022. The average sample size is 17,000, which is by far the biggest sample anywhere ever conducted in Catholic school world. When I looked at surveys from the United States or Great Britain, big surveys, 5,000 to 6,000 students. Well, this survey is the largest sample size. Clearly, it's averaging 17,000 and longitudinally over a longer period, so far from 14 to 22. And so this study tracks students. So students who are in year 7 and 14, we can track how their faith attitudes, beliefs and practices change from when they're in year 7, year 9 and year 11. It's a brilliant tool. And the organisations that help us collate this information and put it all in bound volumes and easily accessible. This made my life as a student incredibly easier. I didn't have to spend years surveying anybody. It was already done. And that survey, there are a lot more doctorates that could come out of it. And anyway, what's the most important thing that I saw coming out of this survey? For students, Catholic students in Sydney Catholic schools, secondary schools, something that's common in all Catholic secondary schools in the Anglosphere around the world. That is, primary education is not too bad. When they get to high school, they fall off the cliff. So, note this number. The number of students in year 7 in Sydney Catholic schools who are either atheist or agnostic, that is, they don't believe in God or they're not sure whether God exists, is roughly 13%. 13% when they're in year 7. This is the 2014 stat. When they got to year 11 in 2018, that had increased from 13 to 33% in our schools. This is hardcore data. The margin of error is relatively tiny because of the large sample size. That was in 2018. The 2020 figure was slightly improved. 31.8% only were atheists or agnostic by the time they got to year 11. And that alone tells me, and we didn't research this, but my gut feeling, that's telling me we're not providing the answers these emerging adults need as they are confronted with the bigger questions and issues in society, in the world that they're engaged with in social media or mainstream media, etc. If they're falling off the edge and becoming atheist, and that's thousands of students spending 5 years in our Catholic schools, thousands of them are becoming atheist or agnostic. Why? We don't know exactly, but my gut feeling is, as I said already, we are not providing the deeper answers We're not answering the why questions. We're teaching the what. Sometimes we don't teach the what, sadly. But even when we're teaching the what, it's at a certain level, catechetical level. But we're not teaching the why. We can teach about the Trinity. We can explain what the Trinity is, but we're not answering critical questions about the Trinity that these students might be hearing from Islamic friends and neighbours in these suburbs or atheists on the internet. We're not providing those deeper answers, those reasoned explanations, which is, I just summarise as answering the why questions. And so I see there is a critical need for apologetics in secondary schools that doesn't answer every question to every issue, because that's impossible, but answers a lot of questions to a lot of issues and leaves imprinted in the back of the minds of these students that the Catholic Church does have the answers. And if you don't know them at the time, that's okay. You can find them out. That's what kept me in the Catholic Church. When I was confronted by Stephen and Andrew, Baptists and Sydney Anglicans, high school and Sydney Law School, and they came up to me with their questions, their accusations or whatever, and I didn't have the answers, one thing that was always in the back of my mind is that, look, the Catholic Church is really big and really old. It must have the answers. I don't know what they are, but they must be out there. And that's why when I read the question box, I just went bingo. And bingo, hundreds of times to each answer that I read. So, we went around, back to the project. Those surveys identified where the gaps in knowledge and practice were. That helped me design the 36 topic titles, and from there we developed the 36 lessons. They are not the best when it comes to pedagogy. I'm not really a pedagogue. Pedagogy, I know what it means and I know why it's important, but I've always been old-fashioned chalk and talk, and listen and write this down, and if you've got questions, I'll answer them for you. I'm not really great when it comes to activities and group activities and homework. I don't believe in homework and hard assignments. You just make students hate religion when you give them a lot of homework and hard assignments. They hate it. You've got to make religion exciting, interesting, fun and easy, and just give them clear answers to their questions and good example and good witness as someone who teaches and they know, hey, this guy believes what he's teaching and he tries to live what he's teaching. That's what we need more important than anything else, etc. I'm not discounting pedagogy or different methodologies, absolutely not at all, but I just have an emphasis on other things. All right, and in the end, yes, I finished the thesis, had it marked, and it's now bound and it's on my shelf and it's collecting dust. But I'm not going to allow it to just collect dust. We can't. I did this for a reason. I'm presenting this talk tonight for a reason. You're not the problem crowd. You're good Catholics. You practice your faith. You know your faith and you keep learning your faith. And you're involved in different apostolates and works in the church. And you generally believe in apologetics. But how are we going to get more people to not only believe in the need for apologetics, but actually get interested and want to be one? What qualifications do you need to be an apologist, to even start as an apologist? You need to know all the ancient philosophies, all the philosophies of the Middle Ages and St. Thomas Aquinas, all the philosophies of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, all modern philosophies and postmodernism. You need to know ancient Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek and Latin and all the languages from ancient Samaria onwards, right? And you need to know the scripture in its original Hebrew and Greek and all the different manuscript versions, okay? And you need to know all the great commentators on scripture. And only once you've got that can you start to open your mouth. That's how some people act. No, you don't need any of that at the beginning. You just need to have a desire and a love for the Catholic faith and a desire to learn it and to teach it and to defend it. And when you engage someone and you don't know the answer, that's fine. You say to that person, hey, look, I'll get back to you in 24, 48 hours. I'll look it up. The technology now is a lot better than it was 30, 40 years ago. When I started, you could look something up and say, hey, Joe, I've got the answer for you. Have a look at this. Tell me what you think. All right? I remember once someone gave a talk at Lumen Verum and someone said to me, why is that person speaking? They don't know philosophy. And I just, what do you mean? If we don't start until we know everything, then no one will ever start. And nothing will ever get done. So if you want to be an apologist, that's the best starting point that you want to be. And you'll make many mistakes, as I made many colossal mistakes. And you'll keep growing, you'll keep developing. And when I'm long dead and buried, there'll be thousands out there. That's my dream. Not because of me, not caused by me, but caused by God and other people saying we need to do something. We should do something. Anything, anytime, anywhere. I remember, I like history as well, and I remember I was very excited in the 70s when World at War series came out. My favourite episode is the fall of France. There's one line in that episode that stuck with me forever. When France was looking like it was just going to be defeated in a matter of weeks and all was falling apart, they brought in a general from Syria, who was governor of Syria and Lebanon, Vagard. And the command they gave him, General Vagard, was do anything. Just do something. The situation was so desperate. They were his orders. Do anything. Just do something. And it's like that now. Things are so desperate on the apologetics front. My instructions to any up-and-coming person is do anything. Just do something. Make it happen. And if it's poor at first, that's all right. Because you'll learn from your mistakes and you get better and better and better. Okay? And one day, some people will be great. When Lumen Verum started, the very first night, 15th of February 1996, we had Brother Christian, and I think, is he still alive? Because if he is, he'll be 100 years of age. Because he was born in 1922. He gave the first lecture over there in that room, in the corner, that demountable, in the corner, before this hall was built. And someone came up, a good friend, good fellow, came up to me and said, this thing shouldn't be happening. This Lumen Verum shouldn't be happening. Everyone should be going to Alice Nelson's talks at Beverly Hills. Now, I'm a fan of Alice Nelson, and I was a student of hers for 9 years. But I thought to myself, you've got to be kidding. What happens when Alice Nelson's gone? Who else is going to be doing things? All right? And she's gone to God now for the last couple of years, died just over 2 years ago. But there are some people who have taken her work and the work of the Centre for Thomistic Studies forward still. And we just need those new warriors for faith, hope and love and truth and catechetics and evangelization and apologetics into now and into the future. All right. This book that I've got here is this is the course that I developed. This is a 36 lesson course. It's very structured, very constrained. When you look at it, it's not a book that you read, it's a manual that you use. And I've got everyone who buys one of these can also buy the thumb drive that has it all electronically, so you can just print things off. And it gives very minute instructions. It's basically micromanaging a teacher. And it says spend 12 minutes on this section, 7 minutes on this section. If this was given to me, I wouldn't follow any of these rules myself. And it gives all these resources by way of books and articles and internet resources and videos, etc. So it's not bad. So what I want to see was something like this. This is going to sell maybe 100 copies in my lifetime, a few hundred. But if there are people who are teachers in schools, or there are people who work in parish ministries, RCIA, or, whatever, this can be a resource that they could look at the contents page, and they can say, well, that's an interesting topic. Okay, the reality of miracles, all right, that's lesson 19. Okay, what can I take from that? And I'll use parts of that in my next session with the catechumens, etc. Or, you know, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that's important. Communion of saints, law and conscience, the Catholic faith and other religions. Okay, God as Trinity, creation and evolution, origins of humanity, the Bible, myth or history, divinity of Christ, bodily resurrection of God. These are what we identified as gaps in knowledge. So this is now a resource that's available. Perugia is selling good numbers. I've sold 3, gave away 1. Okay, so yeah, it's on the worst seller list, definitely. But honestly, I believe in it. I think it's a good resource. Is it going to get into schools? No, because it doesn't work that way. It can be given to teachers. If I met teachers, if there were teachers today from Sydney Catholic schools working in secondary schools here tonight, I say, look, get one. You teach RE, have a look, see how you can use it in your way in the classroom and get something out of it. That's what I would say to them. Right. Okay. I've finished. How long did I go for? Too long? Sorry for that.